Hello and welcome back to Creative Control, the entertainment podcast. I'm your host, Kenan, and thank you very much for joining us on today's episode. It's going to be a bit of a strange one for me today because I'm a little bit out of my element. So I'm going to be entrusting to one of our guests today on the show. But my left-hand man, as I always say, Neil, is on the show. And for the longest time, welcome back, Chris. How you doing?
How you doing? Good to be back.
Good.
It's good to have you. It's good to have you. Well, like I say, Chris is out on half term this week, so he's been able to free up some time, which has been brilliant. So it's really great to have you back on the show. And today we are going to be talking about a subject which Chris knows a lot more about than myself or Neil. I had to definitely do my research before we started delving into this, and so I think for some of our listeners, they'll be very much on the side of myself and Neil. We're like, what is this? What does it mean? What can we look forward to? And that is, we're going to be talking about Henry Cavill and his involvement with the Warhammer 40K series and movie, which is in development. So just before we move on, I just want to say again, thank you very much for being here. And if you haven't already, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you want to check out the video version of this podcast, you can see it on YouTube and Spotify. And for the audio version, you can get it on Spotify and all other major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast, Audible, Good Pods. We are everywhere. So thank you very much. So you may be asking, what is Warhammer? Okay, so I'm going to sum it up slightly here, and then we're going to go into a little bit more about it. So Warhammer 4000 or Warhammer 40K is a miniature war game produced by Games Workshop. So it's the most popular miniature war game in the world, and it's particularly popular in the UK. The first edition of the rulebook was published in September 1987, and the 10th and current edition was released in June 2023. So if you're thinking sort of like miniature war game, little minifigures which are sort of like crafted and painted, it's also, think along the lines of like Dungeons and Dragons type of thing. So that's kind of give you in the ballpark of where we are. Okay. And the reason why we're talking about it is Henry Cavill. Cavill came back as Superman at the end of Black Adam. And then, unfortunately, that wasn't going anywhere because we got a new DCU from James Gunn and a new Superman being cast. So that, pushed Cavill back out if he was ever really going to fully step back into the fold. But this is something that he is very, very passionate about, and he is a big fan. And it's not just something that he's getting involved with because of his name. So it was announced on December 18th, 2023, that Amazon Studios had acquired the rights to Warhammer 40K, and Henry Cavill will star and produce a TV series and a movie for them. Okay, so this is something that he posted on his Instagram, and he said, "For 30 years I've dreamt of seeing Warhammer universe in live action. Now, after 22 years of experience in the industry, I finally feel I have the skill set and experience to guide a Warhammer cinematic universe into life. Partnering with Natalie Vascuso, I think it is, at Vertigo has been a blessing beyond words. Without her, we might have not found the perfect home at Amazon. And having a home like Amazon will give us the freedom to be true to the massive scope of Warhammer. To all you Warhammer fans out there, I promise to respect this IP that we love. I promise to bring you something familiar, and I endeavor to bring you something fantastic that is as of yet unseen. Our first steps to find our filmmaker / creator / writer. Watch this space, my friends, for the Emperor." All right. So this project is still in the very early stages of development. There's no official casting choices have been made yet or anything like that. The only thing we know is Cavill's going to be involved. Games Workshop is keeping a close eye on the IP, and it's built in caveats to the deal on how Amazon portrays its universe. So there's two big Warhammer projects officially coming, and it's obviously got the series and the movie. So Cavill also recently shared some updates whilst doing the press tour for the film Argyle, and he spoke a little bit more about the project and his excitement for it. So again, I'm going to quote him. "Warhammer is progressing very well," he said. "Big things are happening and we're very excited. I've loved Warhammer since I was a boy, making this moment truly special for me. The opportunity to shepherd in this cinematic universe from its inception is quite the honor and the responsibility. I couldn't be more grateful for all the hard work put in by Vertigo, Amazon, and Games Workshop to make this happen. One step closer to making a nigh-on-lifetime dream come true. It's the greatest privilege of my professional career to have this opportunity. I can't say too much again, it's still early days, but to have this opportunity to bring it to the screen, to be at the tiller, can be faithful is key to me. This is the stuff I've been dreaming since I was a kid. This is the stuff I spend my free time daydreaming about as an adult as well, and I get to bring it into life. There is no greater reason than I joined the industry than doing something like this." So by those words, you can see this man's passion for this project, like no other. Do you know
Serious
what I mean? And
Yeah.
exactly. And it's it's a passion project for him. They recognize that because he's dripped it throughout interviews throughout the years when he's spoken about things, you know, and he's made it very well known that he's a huge fan of this. And so the reason we brought this together today is Chris is available. Chris knows about Warhammer. So first of all, Chris, I'm just going to come to you first. And what are your thoughts about Cavill's involvement in this franchise, or potential franchise? And then we'll go into specifically more about Warhammer and what it is.
I think, I mean, thanks, Ken. I mean, I looked when I was looking up coming to the podcast. I looked up the number of interviews he's done. It's been over the last few years that he's really pushed for it. I mean, I've just enjoyed seeing him champion something that is something so an antithesis of what people see him, regular people see him as. You know, people see the body, people see the looks, they see him as this good-looking guy. They don't realize, unless you've watched the Graham Norton from the past, where he's on with Russell Crowe, and where he talks about the fact that he was overweight, he was not a happy kid when he was at school, and that he was at school when Crowe went and filmed Proof of Life. Which I know I saw with Ken, actually, I think a long time ago, 1999. But when Cavill was up filming, when Russell Crowe was up filming that, he met Henry Cavill on the side of a rugby pitch and said, "Oh, I'm definitely going to be an actor." And then lo and behold, many years later, they're sat on the same sofa on Graham Norton.
That's right, yeah.
And so I say that Warhammer is something that does appeal to the geek and a lot of people, and therefore doesn't always, those kinds of kids are the ones who are going to be, unfortunately, playing it. And I think I'm really happy for him to be doing it. A passion project for him. He said apparently in other interviews he's been playing Warhammer or been involved in it since he was 10. And the other thing that I find really lovely about him is that when he did the interview about, not so much about this, but about Superman, where he said he nearly missed the phone call because he was playing World of Warcraft and he couldn't come off the game to finish the end because he was too busy playing to take the phone call. So, I mean, this is a guy who I think is, through his own choice, loves fantasy, loves the role play sort of situation where he's playing in a different universe. Given the kind of characters he's portrayed, even going back before, the Gods and Emperors before that, which is like he loves that kind of fantasy element. This is the stuff he's drawn to.
Oh yeah,
so I think it's going to be fantastic. And it's going to be Gods of Egypt. Maybe it could have been.
Immortals. Yeah,
Immortals. That's the one. Sorry, there's been a few of those ones, but basically, he's been involved in this in one way or another. So I think it can't be anything but good to have someone so passionate and so knowledgeable about the universe taking it on as a producer as well as an actor. So the producer bit is the important bit. He said that about Witcher before he left. He said that he found it hard working on Witcher because he played it and knew it, and the people he was working with weren't necessarily fans, and there was a little bit of that issue when he was coming to portraying the characters.
I'm very happy. I'm very happy for him because he came to a period where maybe he dropped Witcher, maybe for creative reasons, but was he in the thought process if he might be going into the Superman phase again? Do you know what I mean? It's like, but two big franchises of him seem to close their doors on him in terms of Superman and The Witcher. And then it was like, oh man, feel for this guy. He's too famous for Bond now, so you know he's not going to play James Bond.
He's not
and Bond, so it's like, well, what's next for him? And like you say, now that he has this creative side as well, and the fact that he's got the confidence to take that on, because like you say, he's been around the industry a long time, but somebody to take on that kind of responsibility as a producer, and it looks like he's really taking on that kind of Kevin Feige thing. Do you know what I mean? Where he's going to oversee it all is a big responsibility. So yeah, Neil, what are your thoughts?
It's okay. I'm kind of torn, if I'm honest. On one hand, I mean, we're all of roughly the same age, so we know, like, admitting you were a geek or a nerd or of that vein in school was like, suicide in school. You were dumped or beat up or both for that. So. You keep that stuff to yourself. So the inner child in me that remembers those times is like over the moon in love with the fact that Henry Cavill, the former Superman, 6 foot something, built like a freaking Roman statue, is happy to admit that he is a nerd, that he is one of us. So I love that, and him being who he is, his star power does mean that he'll be able to like marshal in and say, no, that's not accurate to what's going on. So we're not doing that. The only problem, the other half, that where I'm torn, is I think a lot of films, TV shows, anything, when you get an adaptation of an existing thing, especially when it's existed, you know, like close to 40 years, this thing's like 35 years old now, right? There is a possibility, there's always a chance where it could be a little too nerdy, and you know, you might need someone there to be like, that's not marketable. So
I understand.
You might want to change, you know, you might want to change the old lady to maybe a middle-aged lady, and then we can get this hot actress to play her, you know. You might want to,
I know what you mean.
This character doesn't take off the helmet. Was it? But it's you, and you know, women want to see you in a film, so take off the mask. You know, it's, I think that the scary thing is whether it can be as profitable or as marketable as we want it to be whilst staying faithful. Because not you know, at the end of the day, even something as like Lord of the Rings, as amazing as it was still quite faithful, but it had to make some serious changes here and there.
So,
no,
it's a story for second marketability, 100%.
Yeah. So, I mean, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the fact that, you know, we had a World of Warcraft movie, right? Or was based off a really popular game that loads of people played. It just didn't perform that well. Now, I've never played World of Warcraft, and I haven't actually seen the movie, so I don't know how closely those are connected. But are either of you familiar with both those kind of franchises in terms of the game?
I play it. I played it. I do play it. I play it occasionally. What about Neil?
And how was the movie in comparison?
Played it, but I watched like all of their cutscene trailers and stuff. I always watch cinematics.
So, I mean, the first film, just it's like too long there, but the first Warcraft film apparently didn't do well with us, but apparently did very well in Asia. And actually, marketing wise, did do a lot better. It was fairly faithful within what it needed to be in telling the sort of origin story of not so much World of Warcraft, because bear in mind there's been Warcraft strategy games back into the 90s. World of Warcraft was an MMOG in 2003, so Blizzard was making Warcraft games, 3 Warcraft games before that. That was RTS strategy. So it tells the story of that, the initial world building. And I wouldn't be surprised, funnily enough, if you don't see, since Microsoft have gone on Activision, Microsoft's taken over Activision Blizzard and now own the rights to it. I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe in the future, if it does better in the current situation, a return. Not necessarily the same actors, but that is almost like put Warcraft film number 1 as like the prequels, and the World of Warcraft as like New Hope, that bit. Like there's a time stretch there of ancestors, so therefore you could go revisit it. But I mean, you're right about the marketing side of it. World of Warcraft is a good example where it didn't hit off as well as it could have done. So there is that worry. I totally agree with Neil there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just before we go on to talking a little bit about Warhammer itself and what we can expect, especially for our casual listeners who may not know about it, Henry Cavill has also been rumored to be signing up with the MCU for a role. Now, there's rumors that he could be playing Doctor Doom and stuff like that. In terms of because he has such a project with Amazon, with Warhammer as a producer and a series and a movie, what kind of role do you think he could actually take on with the MCU, which would give him that flexibility to be able to commit to these 2 different potentially big franchises? Because Doctor Doom potentially is one, because he could film a movie, or he would film segments where, like Thanos, it takes years for us to get to him. Or is it actually going to be more of a one and done kind of appearance, you know, where he just appears in one movie? What do you guys
John Krasinski
do you think
style.
it's going to? Yeah, exactly. Do you think that's going to make a difference in terms of what he does with the MCU?
I don't think it will, But the reason I don't think it will is because as Cavill is now, he's not just starring in Warhammer, he's actually producing it.
Mhm.
I think he will make sure that there is no conflict. He will be like, no. January through March, we're doing this. April through May, we're doing that. And like that is where we have to be. And I it wouldn't surprise me. It's weird when for casual listeners, it's going to be weird when I say it. For us, not so much. I think it would be very likely that if there was a conflict of interest, Marvel would lose out.
Yeah.
I think he would rather step away from Marvel and do Warhammer and make sure Warhammer is right than be like, well, I can't be in Warhammer now.
He takes that responsibility because Games Workshop have licensed out their IP in a number of ways: video games, animations. But they always have a very tight control over what they put out there because they've always been very protective of their IP.
Yeah.
And Space Marines, coming in 40K, are essentially their own creation in that respect. They are. If anyone tries to produce in miniatures that are similar, they send out the legal team. They are put into court and they cease and desist. They are very protective of the Space Marines. They can't protect their fantasy games as much because Lotch was one that's a different franchise, and the fantasy game they had, they recently destroyed. Literally blew it up in their lore, blew it up and recreated it so they could move away from generic fantasy tropes, so they could copyright their material. They are very clear about what is theirs and what isn't, and Cavill knows that. And the fans are just not, or even more militant than say Marvel fans can be if things go wrong. Like they will be. There's a lot of positivity, but if things get portrayed badly or if things get changed, I mean, to give you an example, just to give you a small example, they released a book recently, this new fantasy game they've got called The Old World. No plug them in. They released a novel, just a novel. And it's a basic fantasy novel with knights of the round table type stuff. But instead of having men, which have always had men as the knights in this kingdom that we're working with, this faction, all the knights were women.
Right.
The amount of stuff online, if you were a fan of it, that came out literally losing their minds was amazing. And so Cavill knows, from what comments you even quoted him as, he knows it's important. I don't think it's going to be a big role. I don't think it's going to be Doom. Although he could pull it off, and I was quite happy when it got linked. He could pull it off. The first person I felt might have it. I don't think it's going to be. It could be a Captain Britain. It could be a one and done. It could be a small segment thing. But I think, as Neil said, I agree with Neil 100%. He'll schedule it so that he is focused on what he sees as his most important responsibility, because he knows without this, there won't be anything going forward. I mean,
MCU will continue without. Yeah, I think as well. It's a thing to consider is that right now, I think the kind of tabletop / like video game, that kind of the kind of world building type games, such as Warcraft, such as Dungeons and Dragons, such as Warhammer. I think things like that right now, they are in the same boat, or they're at that stage where I think comic book films and that were when like Spider-Man and Daredevil and that started coming out, where it was like you can either go really good or you can go really bad.
But they are an IP to mine. That's the thing. You're right in that respect, Neil. They are at the start of the Marvels, where Marvel Studios, where they could mine what they have from the IP. And believe me, as we get into it, you'll find there is so much depth in not just 40K. They've got a whole fantasy universe they could mine with great characters. Like there is so much to mine here that could be done properly in a film situation that would actually be engaging. If, as Neil said, it's done well with passion, which is what Cavill's going to bring. That's the key. Having him to oversee it and know from a fan's perspective, but also, as he said, with the marketing perspective next to him, I think as long as he keeps his focus on it, I can't see how he couldn't get it at least on the money, if not profitable. We'll see that later, but yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about Warhammer and kind of what it is and what we can expect from this IP. So, as I mentioned, Warhammer is it's a miniature war game, and a Warhammer collection is very unique to each person. It's how you choose to build up your collection is entirely up to you. Whether it's recreating a particular story, how you paint your miniatures, that's the thing. And one of the most rewarding things about Warhammer, I understand, is obviously creating that collection, is buying those pieces, putting them together and painting them how you want to paint them, and creating your own kind of style. So you've got human soldiers, you've got demons, a mechanical construct, there's all this kind of stuff. And the way it's kind of done is players enact battles using miniature models of warriors and fighting vehicles. They play on a tabletop model of a battlefield, and it compromises of buildings, trees, hills, terrain. It can be like multi-platform, it's not just a flat board. And each player takes turns moving their model warriors around the battlefield and fighting their opponents. And you use dice and arithmetic, to progress through the game. It's a huge IP. I didn't even realize it. There's loads of novels, loads of books for Warhammer in terms of all the different stories and stuff like that there is to be told. There's actually a Warhammer TV, which is Warhammer
recently
TV Plus,
launched.
which
They recently
to,
launched
and
their IP stuff and craft stuff. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and they've got loads of animation series on the Warhammer TV and stuff like that. So it's much bigger than what I comprehended it to be, really. But essentially, Warhammer 40,000 is set in the distant future, and there's stagnant human civilization, hostile aliens, and supernatural creatures, basically. The models in the game are a mixture of humans, aliens, monsters. They got futuristic weaponry, supernatural powers, and it's like I said, you got this basically the novelization which kind of expands that lore, and so it's kind of got a medieval element to it, but it's also got that futuristic and alien part of it as well. So it can span all these different kind of genres amazingly well. So they, in terms of what they can delve into, is huge. So apparently it's set around the turn of the 34th millennium, so about 39,000 years in the future.
Well, although
it's mostly science,
41st. So 41st for 39 going to 40. They've moved the needle slightly every so often just to keep it cracking over.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So you've got races of orcs and elves, and you've got is it seekers or psychers who've got like a wizardry kind of element to them.
Kind of thing.
Right, okay. So I've got some stuff about the Imperium, armies of chaos, Xenos and stuff like that, but I think Chris might be able to tell us a little bit more about that. So Chris, you want to kind of break that down to us, what are these different factions, who are they, what do they mean? Because I'm supposing when you're playing this game, you pick a... Yeah, that's fine. I suppose you pick a faction that you want to follow.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what I'll say to you is that I'll give you like an overview. That's right.
Okay.
So like it's grim dark. So those you watch Star Trek or like that, where it's like a new idealized future of human civilization where everyone's happy and everyone doesn't have jobs and there's no money and all this kind of flowery stuff. That ain't 40K. 40K is, as you said, dystopian. It's broken down. That age is gone, and we're left with no, seriously, it's more in terms of I would say if you've watched like the brutal bits and the cutthroat bits of like Game of Thrones, that's life. 40K. That is like people have meager lives. They live, they die. They honestly never really know what's going on around them, and there are billions of these people living on these hive cities on Earth, and there is an Earth Terra. No, there is it is focused in the Milky Way. Essentially, so there's a Terra, there's a Mars, there's a Titan. There are planets that are recognizable to viewers in terms of the main stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's
but
almost like
progressed.
it's almost like past Star Trek. It's like Star Trek has happened, the Federation's
Yeah, and then we've
collapsed,
fallen apart.
and then civilization's gone into anarchy. So that's why you have
basically,
future elements in it. And,
all
yeah,
technology
okay.
is lost. All technology is lost, all the way to like all that technological advancement. So we're in the second millennium now, essentially. So we're talking about the 40th, 41st millennium. So we're talking about
Right.
38,000 years in the
Beyond
future.
that.
If that makes sense. So
Mhm.
that gives you sort of idea of like, because it is meant to come from our Earth. It is meant to be our Earth. That's the whole point.
Right.
Okay, factions. Try and be quick as possible. So
No,
you've got
don't
the
worry.
Imperium.
Go for it.
No. I could be here a long time. I don't want to be.
Okay.
And also, for the fans of 40K, I apologize because I've done my best and I know a lot about it, but I not know everything. So
Mhm.
leave the hate at home if that's
Sound
the
off
case.
in the comments.
You don't.
The rules still apply, fans. You say
So-
something out of pocket, we will say something about pocket.
Yeah, they will say something
Yeah.
about it, I'm sure. So if you tag this with 40K, I believe you're going to get comments. So, right, Imperium. So the Imperium is like the human civilization. And at the moment, there's billions of regular humans. They have fighting and dying a la World War One. They're like the meat grinders. They're like every guy that goes forward who gets killed, there's another 5 guys to take him forward. They're conscripts. They're out there just fighting the good fight for the sake of their godlike emperor. And you heard that at the end of Cavill's post was for the emperor. That is the war cry. They see this godlike emperor as their savior, and they worship him. Okay, more on him a bit later. So you've got the main Imperial Guard, which is like the main army, which has got the tanks, the aircraft, whatever. You've got even sub factions there. So you've got the Adeptus Sororitas, which is a fully female part of the army that fights on behalf of the church. That they go out and root out corruption, and they are like, again, what a great IP. If you want to do something female orientated, that is literally a female orientated faction. You know, fighting against badass women kicking butt. You know, fantastic. That is all they're about. You've got the Custodes, which are basically the Emperor's guardians. Now, this is the army that Cavill collects. So that's why I want to mention it. So Adeptus Custodes, 1,000 strong. They protect the Emperor. I'll go into more about why he's protecting him a bit later. But they are like the Supermen. They're like cloned off of the Emperor. So they are like, you've got regular guys, you've got Marines, Primarchs will come later. You got Custodes. They are like the Supermen of the Supermen. That's why
super soldiers. Right.
Again, being Superman, I can see why he was interested in wanting the Supermen as his faction.
Right.
But they protect the Emperor. They're the bodyguard. Now, the Imperial Guard can do things in numbers, but the Emperor decided they needed a bit more surgical, more SAS style thing. So he genetically created the Space Marines. So he really literally genetic modification. So you got like a 5'7", 5'8" guard. You got a 6'7", 6'8" Marine. They're clad in the best armor he can find. Got the best weapons, better technology. They're the scalpel. The Imperial Guard is the hammer. They're the scalpel. Is the way to say it. They go in. They destabilize things, and a small force of Space Marines can do the job of a whole army of guard. It's essentially the law.
Yo, I might need to pick up a book. This sounds cool.
So basically, they often fight together. They often fight together. So you might have a force of Space Marines will come in if it's identified as a threat. They'll jump in behind enemy lines. The guard are fighting the front line, and then they'll be worked together. So there's a lot of that. But the Space Marines don't see the Emperor as a god. He's more like a father to them. So he's not a deity to the Space Marines. That's a subtle difference. They see him as their father. And they're divided into 1,000-strong chapters. They're called chapters. Very sort of Romanesque sort of Roman Empire-esque sort of thing of organization, right? So because the words legion is thrown out later on and stuff, so there's a lot of that in that. They are in 1,000-strong chapters. Now the best bit is that these chapters, there's many of them that I can't go into right now. It'd be too hard to go into all of them. They often have a specific fighting style. One called the Raven Guard do stealth and stealth attacks. One, the White Scars fight mainly from bikes. You've got the Blood Angels, who I want to talk about later. They're my favorites. They're like space vampires, and I can't say more about them now. But they're involved in blood. There's a curse. It's great. It's really storyific. They're just I can't even. So I'll talk about it a bit more later. So basically, but there's all these different factions, all these different little chapters have their own fighting styles, and that's the point. They can all do different. They all excel in different areas. Cyborgs, you mentioned, the Astromechanicum. That's Mars. They separated from Earth. They are like part human, part machine, and they're like artificers and builders. So they build a lot of the weaponry for the Emperor's armies, but they are allowed to be almost separate from the Imperium. They don't have to follow necessarily the god Emperor. They have their own god, which is the machine god. But so they are there, but they are not necessarily into the structure. Right. And that, if you can imagine, that's just one faction. Essentially, there's many factions within that. That is the Imperium. That is just the human, the good side of humans and like that. Right. You've got space elves, Aladari, once rulers of the cosmos, very much like the elves in Lotra. They once ruled this cosmos, the stars spanning cross planets, but with their own indolence and inward thinking, they end up causing their own downfall, which is another great story. And they now live on like floating spaceship called craft worlds, like the remnants of their civilization. Very much mirroring that elf thing of like, we once were in charge, now we've kind of caused our own downfall or been part of our own downfall through our own vices and our own ideas. And now we are eking out and holding on to our role, but we're not as powerful as we once were.
Yeah.
There are a couple of others I need to mention by name because others get shot down. So we've got League of Voltan, which are space dwarves, or they were originally called squats. Stubborn, gifted with tech, probably Scottish. That kind of thing. So it's like you can see that character, like they are, and the reason they kind of were in it at the beginning in 87, 90, and they got taken out because the person who owned the IP left the company, and they removed all the mention of the squats. In fact, they killed them off in the lore, and they've recently been reintroduced with new models and new faction as League of Volta. And the last good guys is the Tau. Well, I say good guys. They're like aliens. They're very humanoid aliens. They evolve differently to the Imperium. They don't have necessarily the warp technology you'll understand from, say, Star Trek, where they can jump to stars and jump through space very quickly. So they are limited with their expansion, but they have got a lot of other advanced technology that is not like the Imperium. So the advances in like plasma weaponry and stuff that they've made, rail guns, think rail guns and things like that kind of technology. They've gone up that way. So they are high tech, but in a different way. So, I mean, put it bluntly, that is what you would consider the good guys or the neutral guys. That's just them.
Okay.
You've got the next bit is a bit shorter because the main bad guys will come to, but like Tyranids, think the bugs in Starship Troopers. Basically, an overlanding swarm of bugs that adapt to their fighting, who they're fighting. So if they're fighting space marines, they'll churn out bugs that are specialists to affect them. If they're fighting the humans, they'll do this. They devour planets and biomass, a never-ending swarm. They are an existential threat to the whole universe. Can't be reasoned with. They're a hive mind. They are psychically linked. So, and it's a great bad guy to have because it's a swarm mentality thing, and you're fighting hordes and stuff like that. You mentioned the orcs. I mean, they are. I mean, if you know orcs in fantasy, you know orcs in 40K. Just think the same guys, but with guns and crude weaponry, and that boisterous attitude, just basically causing carnage. And and the more there are, the better they are, etc., and that kind of thing.
Okay.
With a couple of cunning kind of high guys, or like the cunning ones who lead them in these attacks from planets and stuff. Necrons sounds great. They are great. They were alive 60 million years before this, and they were humanoid. They lived on planets where the radiation was so bad they had to transpose their identities and their thoughts and their themselves, their souls into metal bodies to avoid the ravages of their planets. And they were tricked into doing this, and then now they're stuck in like metallic skeletons. Think like Terminators. They can repair. They're living metal. They can they're entombed on all these planets throughout the solar system, and they're gradually waking up. And so you could be living. There could be human civilization. Suddenly, 1,000 Necrons suddenly burst out with their weaponry and start retaking the planet. They think they own they did own the galaxy before they went to sleep, but they're on their way back. Evil space elves, Dukari, space pirates. I mean, these guys, I just can't even get into it. Like they have a curse on them, and the way they avoid that curse, and I'll come into that curse a bit later, is they inflict pain, sadistic pain on others to basically stretch their lives. And the more pain they cause, the longer they live. It's
okay.
Because that will tie in. I don't want to jump in because the main focus of the bad guys is chaos. You talked about the demons and the gods.
Mm-hmm.
This is the main focus of the whole universe. When they're jumping from star to star in this warp, they go through an immaterium, a warp space in like a corridor. Yeah. Think of when you watch Star Wars, for example, you see them do a hyper jump, that little silvery bit. Think of that space as a physical thing. Now,
okay.
Yeah, so it's a place you go through. You travel through it very like instantly, necessarily.
Yeah.
Or more like Star Trek, where it's a bit of a time. But whilst you're passing through this time, at the beginning of the worlds, beginning of the universe, when the universe was created, there were some other races I won't go into. It's too long. That would travel through the stars, and they left their emotions in there, their feelings, their thoughts, and these coalesced into 3 main chaos gods at the time: Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle. Khorne is I'm going to read out his monikers of the names that he's called: the Blood God, Lord of Skulls, Lord of Rage, Lord of Blood, Taker of Skulls, and Karneth. He's basically about fighting and martial honor. He anywhere where there's fighting, he has an influence, and he basically can drive you onto fury and to unadulterated violence and push you over the edge of
so
that.
It's like Ares.
Yeah, violence for violence sake, not for the sake and then to put it down. His champions are generally always fighting. And the thing about him is he doesn't care where the skulls or blood come from, whether they come from his opponents or his followers. He doesn't care as long as it flows. So the Chaos Gods are capricious. They do not care about their minions beyond what they can do for them. That's Khorne. Tzeentch is a trickster. He's more like the sage. He values knowledge and manipulates the fates of the worlds and sets things in motion. That's his kind of bag. Great
kind of Loki character.
Yeah, Loki character, very much so. Likes to, and then anyone seeking like the psychic, you said about the magic, the psychic power to these sort of things they can manifest. He is a bad link for that. Like you can fall into his sway, wanting more knowledge and more power, and that he can give you that, and that's his way of getting you in. And in Nurgle, Plague Lord, Grandfather Nurgle, the Plague God, Lord of Pestilence, he's a funny one. He's seen sometimes as jolly. He's a little bit like a gardener of the world, but like someone who will chuck plagues out just to see what they do. Like likes life, but also like this whole cycle of life and death is his thing. So you'll like get people and like, oh yeah, I'll give you loads of gifts of like this plague and that disease, and oh no, look what's done to you, arm's fallen off. Oh, what a shame. And he won't care, but he likes to see the spread of this sort of pestilence and filth and like plague across and see what happens. So he's a very much Now we get to the really interesting one, and this is the one where the Eldari come in. The elves ruled the cosmos. They became inward-looking, indolent, and full of vices. They basically became self-satisfying. And around 10,000 years previous to this, the 31st millennium, there was a catastrophe where so many elves were doing this that it birthed the god of decadence and of because the elves that are linked to the immaterium, they have a psychic link to that. They're very psychically oriented as a race. So their feelings, think about us feeling feelings and think about feeling them 10, 20-fold. So their feelings meant a lot more. Their lust, their sort of, think the 7 deadly sins, those kind of things. Those and doing those kinds of things led to the birth of Slanesh, which was the 4th chaos god. When he was birthed in this great cataclysmic event, the psychic shockwave killed billions of these Eldari, just like that. They all just fell stone dead. across the universe, across the whole universe, across galaxy, and planets blew up. So they basically, this is why the Aladari are in the Craftworlds. They caused their own downfall by birthing this god. Now, this god thirsts for souls, and he specifically wants those souls from the Aladari and the Drukhari. Now, the Aladari protect their souls by putting them into little stones, and they're reborn almost into different bodies later on. The Drukhari use pain and torture to stave him off from them. But basically, he's a dark prince. He's about those 7 deadly sins. That's all his bag and that kind of thing.
Okay.
So, and it created an eye of terror, essentially a central point in the universe where chaos can enter the universe. That one event did all this. And that is chaos. And chaos is the big bad. Chaos is what the Imperium and all the other guys want to run from. Chaos, except for the Tyranids, you can't really assimilate them because they're magical beings, but they don't fear them necessarily. But like all the other races know to fear the demons that can be summoned. And there's more to it, which I want to go into later. But we'll take a break and get your feedback on that first.
This
scene. There's so much.
This sounds like, in my personal opinion, is listening to you talk. This sounds like what would have happened if Tolkien looked at the future instead of the past.
Yeah.
This is literally like, I'm listening to you talk, and I'm like, this is what, this is like what happens if Tolkien were around when he was making Lord of the Rings, and like instead of his friends being freaking Lewis Carroll, his friend was James Cameron and Ridley Scott. If those two were his friends, and it was like, and be like, oh, I'm thinking of I think we have a different race, similar to human but different, and we're like, make them space elves.
You're right. It's like Tolkien. It's like Tolkien, Lucas, and Cameron all sat in a room together, and we're like, let's think up something.
This is what happens in the game that's 35 years old. The game started off small, and it just and as they wrote things in, it just evolved, and so now we've got to this point where 35 years down the line, 10 editions in, they've established this whole world of characters and races that are now part of this very rich tapestry and interlinked sort of existence, with chaos almost there as like the other side of I think Stranger Things, Flip on the other side of it, chaos is there. And honestly, that's not even the best bits about chaos in terms of those are the main bits, but the main Ken, you go first, because I think I got like the main story that I think
I think you've summed that up really well. And so now I've got a really decent understanding of, like you say, the fraction and what it's about, and it sounds awesome. I'm not going to lie, because like you say, you've got these different each fraction has got its own subsidiary sort of like sections and parts and stuff like that, and you can see why from a board game or from a war game kind of view how collectible and how people get involved in this kind of stuff, because they'll like a particular faction and they'll build on that and develop on that. But there's so much to explore. And I love the fact that it's a cross of between all these different styles. You have sort of like your medieval style and your dystopian future style. You have fantasy, you have mechanics and actual science and technology and stuff like that. And so the fact that it's all built in together, it sounds awesome. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to be a board gamer, but I'd like to see maybe pick up a book and read this. Do you know what I mean? And just have a little look, because this sounds fascinating.
I ain't gonna lie. As you were talking, I think you weren't out of humans yet.
No,
right? We were talking, and I was like, right, okay, so
I can get on board with some of this.
I was like, I started typing. I was like, Warhammer 40K books.
Yeah, right.
Because I love epic, like really, really epic storytelling, and this is just
it's so big. Cavill's main focus is going to be, how do I narrow it into a sizable, we'll come to that, sizable entry level piece that I can hook people in without going too big. You
Too
go
big.
too big, it's like boom.
Well, I think
Like
it's
you're
too
there,
big
you're like,
too fast.
And you
Yeah,
can't
too
start with
fast.
just huge amounts of exposition. You know, something
No, you start small.
like if you think about something like Rebel Moon,
Yeah.
the start of it was all exposition. Do you know what I mean? Trying to establish it. You
Don't
need
do
to
that,
build
no.
it slowly. And to me, it makes the most sense to go with a series first and then a movie. I could be wrong, but I think if you can play out
No,
all these
I
different
would agree
factions in
with
a
you.
series, then it culminates into a movie and it kind of goes back and forth. That makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, I see it as like being not having, basically not being in the position of the MCU where you can make a story about one group of people, a story about another group of people, and then build it up, and then in like,
there isn't
5
that.
years, then you can drop like, oh, here's the team up with everyone.
There isn't that team up. There's very rarely a team up, say, between the Eldari and the Space Marines. The only ones who really team up the most are the Imperium in terms of the different parts of the Imperium. But even the Custodes are very rarely involved because they very rarely leave the palace the Emperor is in. The Sororitas will be. Sororitas, Space Marines, Imperial Guard. They're the ones who are out there most of the time for the good guys. Living on, and bear in mind that the human civilization is on many planets. It's not just on Earth. They have spread across the Milky Way, at least in the initial areas of it. So that is the main. There is not like Eldari fighting with Space Marines, fighting with Voltan, League of Voltan. That doesn't really happen in the lore. Each faction is almost indistinct. The Imperium, etc., etc., and their motivations are different. But sometimes you may get a crossover of characters in a smaller scale story, which I think Cavill needs to be looking at in terms of that. But I can go on to what, if you want me to, Ken. I can go on.
Carry on, man. Carry on. The floor is
the main
yours.
story, the main narrative that will probably tick a lot of your boxes again, which is the main narrative of the Horus Heresy. So this is why I explain a bit more about the Emperor now and his sort of him as a person and now as a god. So 10,000 years before. So we're in the 11,000 years, so 30th millennium. Earth is still struggling through this lack of technology. People are fighting people on Earth. There's no unified population, factions on the actual planet. Emperor, as in all sort of holy words, the Emperor suddenly arrives. He's there. And he bands humanity together on Earth. He's a very, very powerful psyker, as in user of powers himself. Psychically gifted. He just amazing, kind of like the epitome, like just above and beyond everybody else who's been on that planet before. He gets everyone together. They unify as man, as one race, one planet, focused towards that. And he starts building up the planet, looking for this lost technology and helping them start the planet anew and build them up. And then what happens is about the 31st or 30th millennium, he sets out on the Great Crusade. Think Roman Empire here. Think setting off with armies of the Imperial Army and across the Milky Way to unify planets under the Imperium, under his protection. Now, this is when he said, I told you about the Space Marines, he realized he couldn't do this with the Imperial Army. They weren't big enough. There weren't enough of them. Couldn't be split up enough. There were many billions of them, but not good enough to do what he wanted. So he created the Space Marines. But before he created the Space Marines, he created the Primarchs. 20 individuals cloned from the Emperor, not like the Custodes. These were going to be his generals. And he cloned them first. He made them first, better than the Space Marines. They were human, but they were better than the Space Marines. And they were going to be the generals of these Space Marines that he was going to create afterwards, and lead them. Yes.
Question. Sorry. Right.
Chris is going teacher voice. I was like, yes, question.
So, Custos. Am I pronouncing it right? Custos?
Custodes, yeah.
Yeah.
They're like genetically split from the Emperor, but they're not Primarchs. They're not Primarchs. They
are Space Marines or they're
not. They're not Space Marines. They're not.
Right.
I know it's really hard to do. So essentially, you've got the Emperor top of the pyramid, Custodes be underneath, then Primarchs, then Space Marines, and then the Guard underneath. So much like Primarchs are lesser than the Custodes. Custodes are even more powerful than them in many respects. Sorry. Okay.
All right. I'm with you now.
So these Primarchs were meant to be leading the armies, but Chaos gods intervened. They took the 20 Primarchs and they scattered them across the universe, the Milky Way. They took there's no description of how. They are just, it's part of the mythos that they just scattered them, and they were not then grown and then like born and then allowed to develop under the emperor's tutelage. They were left to grow independently on these different planets with their own values and their own personalities, and then obviously their own vices and their own flaws. Okay. So they all, again, like this, like I said about the chapters, and the chapters were bigger then. They were called legions back then. They were 10,000 strong back in the Crusade. They got split up later. They all had their way of war, you know. And so the Primarchs were meant to mirror that. They had one was a amazing general, like of all things. One was a stealth specialist. One was a bike specialist. One was this specialist. So they were meant to go with those chapters. And so when they got scattered, the Emperor was lost. He didn't know what to do. So he basically, look, I'm going to create the Space Marines anyway. I need the army. We'll go find them. So he sets out, he creates the Space Marines over a number of years, tens of thousands strong. Off they go on this great crusade, and they liberate these planets one by one from the taint of orcs or chaos or whatever. It's all there, and they go. But at this point, they're just like a cleansing flame across the galaxy. He finds the first Primarch, which is called Horus, hence the name of the time. Horus is that amazing captain. He's the general of all trades. He can do everything. He's a great reader of personalities. He can understand humans, who are much lesser on the scale to him, but he can understand their psychology. He knows how to fight battles. He's a brilliant tactician. He's the Caesar. He's the Caesar of all the Primarchs. Good at everything, right? And he was found very early on. So it was really, for about 100 years, it was him and the Emperor together, just the two of them. Maybe a lot less bad, but basically it was the two of them for a number of years. So he learned from the Emperor straight away. And he knew it was the Emperor. When the Emperor came down to, and because the Emperor could sense him, he went down to the planet, found him. Horus knew it was the Emperor was his father, and he knew that he'd been created by him, and it was a good coming together. Now, so favored son, Horus. They go through the planets. They find the other 18 Primarchs. A couple are lost, and we never find them. And they're on the rule books. It's redacted, like very mysterious. That these Primarchs are never found, or they are found and not mentioned. I know, it's hilarious. So, but he goes through and finds the majority of the Primarchs, reunites them with their chapters, the Blood Angels, and the Imperial Fist, the Ultramarines, the sons of the Lunar Wolves, who would become the sons of Horus later. That's Horus's chapter, and they're all fighting on different fronts, spreading out across the galaxy. Now, the Emperor is focused on finding the Primarchs. He leaves Horus in charge a lot, and goes off individually to find them, bring them back, and about 1,000 years after the start of the Crusade, there's a big battle called Alinor, and Horus does so well, like marshalling about 3 different Primarchs. The Imperial, he's balancing 7 or 8 plates on this planetary invasion, gets the biggest orc army he's ever seen across the whole planet. He wins. The Emperor at this point suddenly goes, "I forgot the milk." That's because he goes, "I need to go back to Earth. I've got a project to work on. Horus, you're now War Master. You're in charge of all your brothers." So now he's been elevated above his brothers. He's in charge. And then we start to see things go wrong. One of the chapters has been corrupted by chaos, the World Bearers. They arrange that Horus is going to be injured. They take him to a special moon. He is corrupted by chaos, and he is turned. And he turns fully half of the Primarchs and the Space Marine forces to the Chaos side. I've shortened that by many, many lines because there's a lot of exposition there that I don't want to go into.
Yeah.
But that's the essential one, right? It turns one of the Primarchs was called Magnus. He's conned into virus bombing one of the other chapters' home planets. Realizes by Horus. He's evil. He realizes that he's done something wrong. He sends a psychic message to the Emperor because he's a big psycho, Magnus. He sends a psychic message to the Emperor trying to say, "Look, watch out. Emperor has outlawed psychics." He immediately calls him a traitor. He's not a traitor. He's tried to warn him, but he basically gets forced into being a bad guy. Horus traps three legions on a planet and then basically ambushes them and wipes them out and kills 2 of the Primarchs there. He absolutely makes a beeline for Earth. Now, He scatters the remaining legions with other forces to keep them busy, but his main force heads to the Imperial Palace, to Terra, lays siege. You've got one, maybe two chapters, two legions of Space Marines at the palace, plus the custodes, plus the sororitas, plus all these people, but not many. And the remains, and most of the army is out in space. They can't get back. Horus has got maybe 5-6 legions plus his own, and he's laying siege. And eventually it becomes a point where the Emperor realizes he can't win the siege, no matter how much he holds out. No one's coming to relieve them. So he teleports onto the Horus's barge, his ship, with Sanguinius, who is the Primarch of the Blood Angels, my favorite chapter. This is the Primarch who, due to when he was scattered, he got affected by the warp energies. He grew wings like an angel, which is hence the Blood Angels. He's got a gift for premonition, like fast foresight. He's a great warrior. He's not maybe at this level of the Emperor or Horus at this point, because Horus has got chaos now giving him power, but he's the level just below that. And so Sanguinius realizes he's got to go with the Emperor. When they get teleported onto the barge, they get separated. Sanguinius faces Horus first, and it's this whole thing of he chinks his armor. That's the best he can do. He gets a slight slip of his armor, and he's still crushed and killed by Horus. And he was one of his supporters. They were brothers in arms. One of the people who really championed Horus as being the War Master and thought it was a good idea. It was Sanguinius. So this is like a real betrayal for that. And even in that battle, he tries to turn Sanguinius because he doesn't want to kill him, but he won't be turned from the Emperor. The Emperor then fights him. He fights because cataclysmic battle between the two. Horus is defeated, but the Emperor is broken. He has to go on. He goes back to Earth. He's transported back to Earth and placed upon this golden stasis throne in the middle of Earth, where it was palace. And he is, for all intents and purposes, no longer active. His mind is active. His psychic beacon, which is like he sends out signal, is what they tether onto when they're traveling through the warp to Terra. But his body's broken. He's now in stasis. And now, currently in 10,000 years later, he is fed psychers. He consumes them. Their psychic energy to stay alive. That's how grim dark we're talking here. 10,000 a day.
Dang.
Damn.
So that story is the great betrayal and the great civil war of Marine versus Marine, brother versus brother. It's got, if you look on the Black Library, Neil, and look up Horus Heresy series, there is 20 or so books of novels with the storyification of it. It is the key story for the Marines. It is the key forming story for.
Do you think that's where they will start? Do you think that's the entry point?
It could not as an entry point. It's too big. It's huge. It's huge. You couldn't do Horus. You couldn't do the Emperor. It's just massive. It's a galaxy span. They've done. It could be, but it's so hard to see how they would do it as a series.
Yeah,
it would take
the pressure on the writer who's going to take this on.
I want to take this job.
Do you know what I mean?
Gary Abnett is the author. Dan Abnett is the author of most of the Horus Heresy novels. There's a reason why he's the majority author. He has, and I think at least at the beginning he was, and then he's got other things. But that story is your typical story of the favored son falling to vice and falling to chaos and fighting against the father. I mean, the richness of it is massive.
Yeah. But do these stories play into the actual playing of the game, or is it just the lore behind the characters?
The legions that fought with Horus didn't die; they escaped. So those the Thousand Sons, the World Eaters, the Plague Guard. These are people who fought 10,000 years ago at the Siege of Terra. Those people are still alive in the Eye of Terror on the side of Chaos. They are still factions you can fight. So those Marines are 10,000 years old, but time moves differently. So there are people alive in the Chaos forces who fought in the siege 10,000 years ago.
Yeah,
there are no.
That's what I'm saying. Do these narratives actually play into the game when you're playing? Are you aware of? Yeah.
In terms of you can do, and they have grand campaigns where they give you story support and they give you faction books and they move the faction on. You know, currently there is no Horus, but there is Abaddon, who was essentially Horus's clone. They cloned him, and he's
Right.
led the Chaos Forces recently. But there's also the Primarchs are still alive. Magnus, the one I told you about, he's still alive. The evil Primarchs all survived, changed by chaos, turned into demons almost. Only recently having they in the tabletop game revealed that some of the loyalist Primarchs who were alive back then, Lionel Johnson for the Dark Angels and Robert Gulliman for the Ultramarines, they've apparently have arrived alive in the 41st millennium.
Okay.
And so basically, they're setting up for a whole new thing now. I can't go into the board game, but that story is the foundation of the central foundation pillar for like the Marines and the Imperium. And obviously, Space Marines are your selling point. So they want that. That's who you go into when you go into a shop. You're given a Space Marine to paint. You go with the Space Marine. So like that central pillar is the history of the Space Marines and why they fight against evil Space Marines and renegade Space Marines and Chaos Marines now.
Yeah. Wow. Chris or Mr. Marland, as your students would say, that was a lesson, man. I enjoyed that. That's given me a lot to digest. And like you say, that I actually want to go and I just typed into now, like where to start. I need to buy a book now. Yeah.
Book one starts when they're good. It starts at the good point when they're still out on the crusade. It still starts when they are fighting for the same goal. But you see the
I've just read there's like 300 books like available. That's how big this thing
is. Not
so
the Horus Heresy, but for the Horus Heresy.
No. But yeah. So
those novels are like
that. Figure out where to start.
They're not. Sorry, where's my camera? They're not like thin novels. They're like novels, 600 pages.
Yeah. Wow.
It'll be good to read. Honestly, when I pick one up, I read it, and I've not got into it that much, but like in terms of reading the books, because I don't have time. But
okay. Because I understand that they've kind of moved away a little bit more from physical books now, and it's more about
more
digital and
Black
audio
Library, what's called
as well.
Yeah, Black Library is the site you can go to for that. No plug-in intended, but basically that's where you're going to find. That's where you're going to find the novels on your like devices and stuff.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because I'm looking it up now, and you're saying Horus Heresy. I'm looking up Horus Heresy.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean that's the main story, but it's big. You want small stories.
I was going to say it's I'm even more impressed if Cavill can pull this off. Do you know what I mean? Because of the scope of it, and like you say, it's finding the balance between sticking to the lore, appeasing the fans, but creating it be accessible enough to the general audience. Because ultimately, this needs to make bank.
I can add one last thing, just more.
Yeah, go for it.
I don't think it will be the series. I can't see it being the series. It's too big. You have to have too many characters. It'd be too all-encompassing, like way beyond anything, way beyond Lotra, the Rings of Power, beyond the size of that. You're talking planets far, like galaxy spanning. So it's too big, I think. The one series that I think would be accessible is, if you might have seen it on the webpage, is Gaunt's Ghosts. Now that is think Sharp, but in 40k.
Okay.
Single regiment of 10, 20 guys or so fighting with a Colonel Gaunt, and they become involved in different. I don't know if anyone's seen Sharp, they would understand. Like Sharp is set in the Napoleonic Wars, so Gaunt's Ghosts are set like he'll be sent to different planets.
That's Sean Bean Sharp, right?
Yeah. Sean Bean Sharp.
Yeah.
Which I think, if you get Sean Bean in this and do a comedy, if they do a Gaunt's Ghost series and then get Sean Bean in that'd be brilliant. Because the author of it, when he first started, said it was meant to be Sharp, but in 40k. Small regiments fight in different battles because you can be sent to different places. You could be posted like the army.
Yeah.
So they would fight, and then the characters are all within that little group, and it's a small group-based thing. And you move around location. You have different stories, and the books go from Gaunt's perspective, but also from a wider perspective. So there's a bit of play there. That to me, and I think this has been echoed online, would be the good entry point because you keep it small scale.
Yes,
and you introduce things gradually, and it's basically
you have to, because otherwise it'll become overwhelming. So
it's too overwhelming to jump into. When you go into a shop and the attendants don't do this to you because they know that they use it's just so much to go on. That's one serious one you could do. There is a more funny one, Cyphers Kane. They're shorter stories, and they would be he's an Imperial Guard captain, and he kind of just has really great luck. He's portrayed and propaganda as a massive hero, but really things just fall into play for him all the time. So he gets victory in like the most weirdest ways, and he just doesn't.
Like
He's
Johnny
not even
English.
he's the one standing at the end going, "We won," kind of thing.
Yeah. Right. All right.
So,
Wicked.
I mean, I can't see anything else. I can't see anything else really. It's too big otherwise.
Yeah. Neil, thoughts?
Damn. I mean, like you were saying about stuff to get into, I'm jumping in with Horace. I'm like, I want to know that because that was You sold me before you sold me because I was like, this
right.
It's such an epic story, and there's so many parts where Primarch fights Primarch on the battlefield. So many where heroes fight hero. One of Horace's. Not everyone in Horus's Legion turns bad, for example. Part of the Legion stays loyal to the Emperor. And there's a story about that within the one part of that Legion is the reason why the Emperor finds out. I don't want to say more than that because you won't want to read it, but basically, like, just like it's just it's had like the Horus Heresy was built up over. It's been built up, not necessarily changed, but it's been built up over years and years and years. They've had plenty of time to flesh this out and think about things and slightly change things and tweak this and tweak that, and now they brought them into the tabletop. You know, currently you can purchase and play with 1, 2 on the good side, Angron, Magnus. 5 different Primarchs are available to buy and play with on the tabletop. And they even changed the game to make it acceptable to have these almost galaxy or galaxy-wide heroes play in a small skirmish. They've kind of adapted it.
I've actually been onto the Warhammer website and had a look at some of their videos, and they show some of the tabletop games. It looks amazing. It looks epic. I think Cavill is very selective. He said this in an interview. Bring it back to Cavill. He doesn't know what part he wants to play. I think he's got his eye on playing like the head of the Custodes, the Arch Captain is called. That's what he's been talking about in some interviews, but he's not sure because he's not even because he knows that as soon as he picks one character, that's it. Yeah,
like I said, there's so many.
Yeah, you can only be one character in this universe, so it needs to be.
So many, and the Emperor's alive, not alive, not alive, but kind of alive. It's just such a hard. It's a hard choice for him. He's going to find it very hard, I think. Yeah, but I can't wait to see what happens.
No, I'm excited.
I remember. I think Cavill's being interviewed for something to do with The Witcher. This is how far back this was, and he mentioned his love of World of Warcraft whilst being interviewed, and it's like the girl who plays Ciri is in the middle, in between these two guys. The interviewer is on the other end of the room. Yeah. And Cavill he mentioned that, I'm part of this faction. And a guy said, "Oh, I'm part of like another faction."
Oh yeah. It was like an instant romance. It was just like they just started chatting.
He was like, you are? And he was like, yeah, we'll sort that out.
That's him saying we'll play. That's him saying we'll play. That's what he's saying. Like, we'll get together. That's like a thing. That was straight away. I could see that. It's hilarious. Yeah. And that's the thing. And you saw the other cast going like,
"We are talking about."
They're like, "What is going on?" Yeah.
I love it. Brilliant. I find it hilarious that because these people, the interviewers, don't have that level of passion for that project. That's such a geeky thing. So they are so unnerved by talking to him. Beautiful man. I have no problem saying that. He's a beautiful looking man.
He's a beautiful man.
And he's talking about something so geeky. You can see their brain short circuiting where they're like not sure how to talk about
process it. Like, because I remember one person asked him about something in an interview, and he's like, "Where did you get your knowledge?" And Wikipedia is like, "Wikipedia?" He was like, "You crazy?" So yeah.
Anyway,
brilliant. All right, well, look, Chris, thank you very much for that. And guys, you listening and watching, let us know your thoughts. Did you know about Warhammer before? How do you feel about it now that kind of Chris is breaking it down for us? Are you excited about this potential series and movie? We want to hear about it. So guys, thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Chris. Thank you so much for the education.
Chris, I'll admit, Chris,
I'm intrigued. I'm going to go away and do some reading. Absolutely. You
Expect,
bought me
expect an angry phone call from my wife at some point because there's going to be some money.
She'll be like, Chris, I had 50 books delivered. What is going on? Why? Stop talking to my husband about this.
My address. That's what I need. I need my influence of wages paid. That's what I need.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for listening, guys. We appreciate it. As always, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe. Make sure you sound off in the comments. Give us that feedback. What are some of the topics that you'd like us to talk about? Remember, we do TV and we're doing wrestling now as well. So make sure, if you haven't already, make sure you check out our wrestling podcast, The Squared Circle. It's part of Creative Control, and we booked the Elimination Chamber. And we're going to be doing another episode soon where we talk about the actual card when it's produced and our predictions for that, and then we'll do one for WrestleMania. So as always, thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure. Until next time, peace out.
Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds.
This is the way.
This is the way.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Were you rushing or were you dragging?
That's what she said.
I don't want to brag, but I will. I was in the Avengers.
The Avengers?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. What is that?
Say my name.
I am your father.
Oh, chills. Literal chills.
It was number 5. Number 5 killed my brother.
Oh my God, I forgot about that part.